The story begins not in a church, nor beneath the sweet promise of vows, but in the white fury of a storm. The kind of storm that strips a soul bare, where every howl of wind feels like God Himself reminding you just how small you are. Out there, stumbling through waist-deep drifts, was Josephine Burke, a mail-order bride who thought she was walking toward a new life. Instead, she was walking toward ruin. If you're drawn in already, if you want more tales of heartbreak turned into legend, I'll ask you right now, before the snow buries this moment, give this video a like, leave us a comment about the loves that move you, and subscribe to the channel. That's how these forgotten stories keep breathing. That's how they keep their fire. Because Josephine's fire was almost gone. Her fiancé, Samuel Carnes, had turned on her just hours before. He was a man of means, a cattle buyer from the Dakota Territory, sharp as a knife and twice as cruel when his pride was pricked. He'd brought her west under promise of marriage, under promise of home. But on the eve of their vows, when the truth of her past came out, that she was not a virgin, that she was not pure in the way he demanded, his face turned to ice. "What?" he spat, his voice carrying over the howl of the wind like a whip. "You're not pure? You let another man touch you. You lied. You're damaged goods, Joe." He threw her small travel bag into the snow, the sound muffled, final, like earth on a coffin. "I don't buy used things," he hissed, climbing onto his horse. "Find someone else who'll take your kind." Then he was gone, just like that, his silhouette swallowed by the white curtain of the storm, leaving Josephine standing in nothing but her wedding dress, thin boots sinking, gloves soaked. She tried to follow at first, tried to scream his name through lips already cracking with frost. But the wind took her voice. The snow closed in like a wall. Every step felt heavier, like she was dragging chains. Within minutes, her shoes were soaked through, then lost, swallowed by the drifts. Bare feet burned against ice, then went numb, turning from pain to silence. She thought about her mother's words back in Ohio. A man may not forward, one last pitiful lunge, and collapsed. The snow caught her like a cruel cradle, soft, yes, but merciless. White flakes settled on her dark hair, on her blue lips, on the stiff fabric of the dress she would never marry in. And then came the sound, a low growl, not the wind, not the storm, but closer, living, breathing. Her half-frozen eyes cracked open to see it. A white wolf, fur thick as the storm itself, eyes burning gold against the darkness. It padded closer, silent but sure, breath steaming. She wanted to scream, but her voice was gone. She wanted to crawl, but her limbs wouldn't move. All she could do was watch as it circled her, a ghost made of fur and hunger. The wolf paused, nose lowering, sniffing at the broken woman dying in the snow. Josephine thought, "This is it, this is how it ends." But then another shadow fell across her, boots, not Samuel's. Heels planted firm, steady in the storm. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, face carved by years of war and weather, his cheek marred by a scar, raw and red against skin the color of the earth. He carried a bow slung across his back, a knife at his belt, and eyes just as fierce as the wolf's, but human, searching, alive. The wolf looked at him, and he at it. For a heartbeat, Josephine swore they spoke without words. Then the wolf stepped back, fading into the storm. The man knelt beside her. She could smell smoke on him, cedar and fire. His hands, rough but steady, lifted her up as if she weighed nothing at all. She wanted to ask who he was, but her lips cracked instead into a whisper of pain. He did not speak yet, only pulled her against him, wrapped her in fur, and carried her through the storm as if she belonged nowhere else but in his arms. Josephine's last thought before the dark took her was that she had been thrown away, buried alive in the snow, but somehow, impossibly, she was being carried back into fire. When Josephine woke, she thought for a moment she had died. The air around her was warm, but not the gentle warmth of a feather bed or a hearth. This heat was rough, Alive, it came in flickering waves, pressing against her cheeks, seeping into her frozen bones. She blinked slowly, lashes stiff with frost, and saw light dancing across the stone. Firelight. Her body lay on something soft, not snow, not ice. Furs, thick pelts of buffalo and wolf, heavy across her frame, carrying the wild scent of smoke and cedar. For a long moment she didn't move. She only breathed, shallow and careful, as if even the slightest shift would shatter this fragile warmth and fling her back into the storm. The storm. Memory crashed in. Samuel's voice, sharp as glass. His words, damaged goods, like nails hammered into her chest. The blinding snow, the wolf's gold eyes, the collapse into white. And then, arms. She remembered arms lifting her, steady as stone. Her eyes darted around the cave. It wasn't large, but it was deep, carved into the mountainside. Shadows stretched long and tall along the walls, alive with the fire's movement. At the far side, a man sat. He didn't look at her right away. His attention was fixed on the blade in his hands, glinting in the light as he dragged a whetstone down its edge. The sound was steady, almost soothing. Shooked. His face was carved by both war and wilderness. A scar split the left side from cheekbone to jaw, raw and red against bronze skin. His hair was black, long, tied loosely at the nape of his neck. His shoulders filled the space, wrapped in leather and fur. And yet, despite his size, there was no loudness about him. He moved like the fire itself, contained, but dangerous if mishandled. Josephine's breath hitched. He turned his head then, slow as if he already knew she was awake. Their eyes met, hers, wide with fear and gratitude all tangled together. His, dark and unreadable, holding her without a word. She struggled to sit, fumbling beneath the heavy furs. Her body betrayed her, trembling, weak, lungs still raw from the cold. He shifted, set the blade aside, and in 2 strides he was at her side. His hand pressed gently against her shoulder, steadying her. "Rest," he said. The word was low, deep as stone. She glanced at the scar along his cheek, then quickly away, ashamed of her curiosity. He noticed, he always noticed. "The soldiers did this," he said. His hand rose briefly, touching the scar with the detached air of a man long resigned to it. "And so did my own people." Josephine blinked. "Both?" He gave no answer, only turned back to the fire. Silence stretched between them, filled by the crackle of flames and the sigh of wind beyond the cave mouth. She studied him in that silence, the way his shoulders hunched slightly, as though carrying weight unseen, the way his hands moved with practiced ease, tending the fire, setting meat to cook on stones. Every motion was measured, efficient. This was not a man given to wasted effort. Her stomach growled, betraying her, color flamed in her cheeks. He looked back, and for the first time she saw it. The smallest flicker of something soft in his eyes. Not quite amusement, not quite pity, something in between. He offered her a piece of meat, roasted, steaming. She hesitated, her upbringing screaming caution, but her hunger won. She reached with shaking hands, and when their fingers brushed, she felt warmth again, not just from fire, not just from food, but from something older, stranger, buried deep beneath scars. They ate in silence. The storm outside wailed, but in the cave there was a stillness, heavy and alive. When at last she lay back against the furs, her body surrendering to warmth, she dared another question. "What should I call you?" For a moment he said nothing, then, "Scott." It wasn't the name his mother gave him. She could hear that in the way he said it. But it was the name he allowed the world, and it would have to do. "Josephine," she murmured, though she doubted he cared for such things. Still, the act of naming herself felt like anchoring, like planting her flag in this strange new world. He nodded once, slow. "Josephine." The way he spoke it was different from Samuel, different from the mocking tongues of the town. There was no ownership in it, no derision, just acknowledgement. As though he saw her as fact, not commodity. The fire popped, sparks rising. Beyond the mouth of the cave, snow howled against stone. Inside, 2 exiles, Days passed, though in the cave it was hard to tell how many. The storm raged and softened by turns, sealing them off from the world beyond. Time was measured not by clocks, but by the rhythm of survival. Fire to be kept alive, meat to be hunted, cooked, rationed, water to be melted from snow. At first, Josephine thought of the cave as a prison. Every stone wall whispered of her entrapment. She longed for a window, for a road, for something that reminded her she still had a choice. But each time she looked toward the cave mouth, the storm hissed and spat like a living beast. And each time, the memory of Samuel's sneer froze her in place. Whatever waited out there was colder than these walls. Scott was a man of silences. He spoke little, moved with certainty, kept his back straight even when sitting. Yet Josephine noticed the smaller things, how he always stoked the fire before leaving to hunt, how he set food within reach without a word, how he watched the shadows at the cave mouth as if expecting enemies. Once, she tried to thank him. Her voice faltered, weak but sincere. "You saved me." He didn't look at her, just stirred the fire with a stick. "Storm saved you," he said. "I only carried you." But Josephine knew storms didn't carry half-dead women through blizzards. Men did. Men who bore scars deeper than their skin. At night, when the firelight painted the walls in flickering gold, she would steal glances at him. The scar across his cheek caught the light like a brand, but it wasn't the mark that held her attention. It was the way his eyes shifted, sharp when awake, softer when he thought she slept, as if guarding her cost him less than letting himself rest. One evening, as snow battered the cave mouth in angry waves, Josephine broke the silence. "I was a teacher once," she whispered. Her voice wavered, but the words needed out. "In Ohio. I loved my students, loved feeling useful. Then a rumor spread that I'd been seen walking alone with a man, a neighbor's son. Nothing happened, but tongues wagged. Her hands tightened in the furs. They said I was ruined, that no man would want me. My reputation gone in a week. That's why I answered Samuel's letters. I thought he wanted me for more than that." She bit hearts. "My tribe saw me broken, thought me weak, turned me out, said the spirits had abandoned me." Josephine's breath caught. Abandoned, she knew that word too well. "And so," he finished, voice low, "I live with wolves." The fire popped, throwing sparks between them. She studied him in that glow, scarred, banished, bearing wounds both visible and unseen. And yet here he was, feeding her, keeping her alive. For the first time since Samuel spat her out, she didn't feel like trash at the bottom of the barrel. Slowly, she reached toward the fire, holding her palms to the heat. Her voice was steadier this time. "Maybe we're the same then." Cast-offs. Scott looked at her, long and hard, until she wanted to shrink back into the furs, but there was no mockery in his gaze, only recognition. "You survived," he said. "So did I. That makes us more than cast-offs." It was the closest thing to kindness she had heard in years. Something in her chest cracked then, not from cold, but from warmth pressing in where she'd least expected it. Later, when he draped his cloak across her shoulders without a word, Josephine didn't protest. She clutched the heavy fabric close, breathing in the faint scent of smoke and cedar. It felt less like pity, more like armor. That night, as the storm raged and wolves howled beyond the cave, she lay awake on the furs. Scott sat near the fire, silent as stone, bow within arm's reach. She watched him through half-closed eyes, his scar lit by embers, his form unmoving, vigilant. And for the first time in her life, Josephine thought, perhaps there is a kind of safety not found in churches or vows or towns. Perhaps safety can be found in silence, in scars, in two souls who have nothing left to lose, except each other. By the time the storm broke, the cave no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a shelter, a fragile bubble of peace carved into the mountain. Outside, the world had tried to kill her. Inside, she had found warmth, food, and silence that did not wound. But Josephine was not made to hide forever. Each day she lingered, Her shame festered like an unhealed wound. When she looked into the fire, she didn't just see flames, she saw faces. The women of Ohio whispering behind gloved hands. Samuel's sneer etched deep into her memory. The crowd that would laugh if she dared set foot in town again. One morning, as Scott prepared his bow, she said it plain, "I can't stay here." He didn't pause, only ran his thumb along the string, testing its tautness. "The snow is deep. The towns are cruel, you know this." Her chin lifted, though her heart pounded. "Cruelty won't vanish because I hide from it." For the first time, he turned fully toward her. His gaze was steady, weighty, like stone pressing down. "They left you to die. They will not welcome you back." Josephine felt her throat tighten, but she refused to flinch. "Then let them look at me. Let them see I lived. I will not be erased." Scott studied her a long moment, jaw working, as if weighing more than her words, weighing her soul. Then he shook his head once, slow. "Honor does not live in places where people laugh at another's pain." The words cut deep because she knew he believed them. But Josephine also knew she had already lost too much. If she surrendered now, if she accepted exile in a cave, then Samuel's betrayal would define her forever. "I'd rather be mocked standing than pitied hidden," she whispered. That ended the argument. Scott said no more, only packed his knife and cloak. She thought perhaps he would stop her when she left, but when she walked out into the thin winter sunlight, he did not follow. The snow crunched under her boots, borrowed from him, far too large but laced tight. Her body trembled, not from cold, but from resolve stretched thin as glass. The town sat nestled in the valley below, smoke rising from chimneys, voices carrying faintly on the wind. Each step closer, her pulse quickened. When she reached the first cabin, eyes turned. A woman at the well froze, bucket rope slipping herself to stand tall. She had come for this, not to win their favor, but to refuse their erasure. "Go home," a woman shouted, "if you've got one." Josephine's voice cracked as she tried to answer. I have the right," but her words were drowned in laughter. The crowd surged, pressing closer, faces twisted with contempt. Children pointed, men spat, women whispered venom. And for a moment, she faltered. Perhaps Scott had been right. Perhaps honor truly could not be found here. Then, silence. It spread like a sudden wind, rippling through the mob until even the loudest mouths snapped shut. Josephine turned, heart pounding, and saw him, Scott. He walked into the square like the storm itself had shaped him, cloak heavy across his shoulders, bow at his back, knife at his side. Beside him padded the white wolf, silent, golden eyes fixed on the crowd. Mothers pulled children behind skirts. Men gripped their belts, unsure if they meant to reach for courage or weapons. Scott's gaze swept them like fire, burning without raising his voice. At last he stopped before Josephine, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. Without a word, he took his cloak and wrapped it around her shoulders, shielding her from snow, from stones, from stairs. His hand lingered just a moment, steady, grounding her as the world held its breath. Then his voice, low but carrying, rolled through the silence. "You left her in the snow." The words hit like a hammer. Murmurs rippled, shame creeping in at the edges. "She survived," he said, his scar catching the fire of his fury. "And you mock her for it." His eyes swept the faces, pinning each in turn. Not a shout, not a roar, but truth spoken plain, too heavy to ignore. "She is mine," he finished. Then softer, so only Josephine heard. "Not taken." The wolf growled, deep and low, sealing the silence with fear. No one spoke. No one dared. Scott turned, guiding Josephine with him, the cloak around her shoulders trailing like a banner. Together they walked through the crowd, untouched, unbroken, leaving whispers and shame in their wake. Josephine's pulse thundered. The silence after Scott's declaration did not last. Townsfolk shifted like restless cattle, anger bubbling under their shame. Men who had spat moments ago now reached for pride, muttering about foreign blood, and witchcraft. Women clutched children, eyes darting between the scarred man and the wolf pacing at his heel. Josephine felt the tension rise, thick as smoke. She wanted to flee, but Scott's hand rested lightly at her back, steadying her as if daring the world to come forward. "Go back to your cave," a man growled, stepping from the crowd. His chest puffed like a rooster's, but his eyes betrayed fear. "We don't take kindly to wild men bringing their filth into town." Scott's gaze did not waver. "You left her to die. I did not." Murmurs erupted again. The man snarled, emboldened by the shifting weight of the crowd. "She's a stain. Samuel did right throwing her out. She don't belong here. And neither do you." Josephine's breath caught. Samuel. His name was poison on the air, but it was enough. Out of the throng he emerged. Polished boots, clean coat, chin held high with the arrogance of a man who believed cruelty was justice. Her heart stumbled at the sight of him. The groom who had turned his vows into a weapon. The man who had cast her aside before God and man. Samuel's lip curled. "I see my trash found a rat hole to crawl into." The words cut sharper than the wind. But before Josephine could answer, Scott stepped forward, placing himself between her and Samuel. His voice, low and dangerous, carried like thunder. "She is not yours to name." The crowd hushed, sensing the earth about to crack. Samuel laughed, brittle and false. "You think you can walk into my town with your pet wolf and your scars and claim what's mine?" Scott's eyes burned. "She was never yours." The wolf growled, deep and rumbling, claws sinking into the snow. Josephine's hands trembled beneath the cloak. She wanted to scream, to beg Scott not to fight, to drag him back into the safety of shadows. But some part of her knew this moment had been waiting since the snowstorm, the reckoning that could not be avoided. Samuel reached for the pistol at his belt. Time slowed. Josephine's breath turned mockery this time, but of doubt. The truth could not be unseen. Samuel's face twisted. He lunged, barehanded, striking at Scott with the desperation of pride unraveling. The two men crashed into the snow, fists flying, boots grinding ice. Josephine froze, heart in her throat. Each blow felt like it landed on her own skin. Scott's scar split anew, blood mingling with frost, yet he did not yield. Samuel fought like a man trying to erase his shame with violence, but Scott fought like a man who had already faced death and lived to bear its mark. The fight ended as swiftly as it began. With a final surge, Scott pinned Samuel in the snow, his knife drawn, blade glinting against the pale throat of the man who had destroyed Josephine's life. The crowd held its breath. Josephine's lips parted, her voice cracking through the stillness. "Scott." He looked at her, eyes burning with the wild fury of survival. For a moment, she feared he would spill blood, feared that his scar and his solitude had carved away mercy. But then she saw it, the flicker of restraint, the choice. Scott pressed the blade harder, just enough to draw a bead of blood, enough for Samuel to taste his own fragility. Then, with a slow exhale, he pulled back. Snow fell softly as he rose, leaving Samuel broken in the street, humiliated but alive. The message was clear. This fight was not about killing. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen. Scott turned to Josephine, his chest heaving, blood mingling with sweat and snow. "You choose," he said, voice rough. "Do we stay, or do we leave this place forever?" The crowd waited, the weight of her answer hanging heavier than the storm. For the first time, Josephine felt the power shift. She was no longer the cast-off bride, no longer the woman left in the snow. She was the one whose choice mattered. Her heart hammered, but her voice was steady. "I will not live where cruelty rules. Let us go." Scott nodded once, as if he had known her answer all along. He placed his hand at her back, guiding her away. The wolf followed, golden eyes sweeping over the crowd like a warning. Not one person dared stop them. Not one stone was thrown. For the first time, Josephine left that town not in shame, but in triumph. The snow was falling again when they left the valley behind. Not the biting, punishing storm that had nearly claimed Josephine weeks ago, but soft flakes, drifting gentle, cloaking the world in quiet. Behind them, the town shrank into shadow, its jeers, its shame, its narrow cruelty fading with every step. Scott walked at her side, silent as ever, the wolf padding close, leaving paw prints that filled slowly with snow. His cloak still wrapped around her shoulders, heavy with the scent of pine smoke and leather, a shield against more than just the cold. Josephine glanced back once, but only once. She did not look with longing, nor with regret. That chapter had burned itself to ash. She was done carrying the weight of their laughter. Ahead lay wilderness, unknown, untamed, and yet she felt no fear, not with Scott's presence steady beside her, not with the wolf's golden eyes watching the trees as though nothing in the forest could touch them. For days they traveled, over ridges, across frozen streams, through stands of pines whispering with wind. At night they camped beneath stars so sharp and endless, Josephine sometimes wondered if she had stepped into another world. The cave had been survival. This was freedom. She learned to carry wood without stumbling, to strike flint and coax sparks into flame. Scott showed her which roots could be boiled into broth, which berries to leave untouched. The wolf hunted rabbit and hare, leaving offerings at her feet as though testing her worth. Slowly, she ceased feeling like a burden and began to feel like a partner. One evening, as the fire crackled low, Josephine dared to ask the question that had burned in her since the fight in town. "Why didn't you kill him?" Scott sat across from her, knife in hand, carving a strip of wood with steady strokes. His scar caught the firelight, half his face shadow, half flame. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a low voice, he answered, "Because killing would have bound you to him forever. I wanted you free." Her breath caught, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. Freedom, not rescue, not pity. Freedom. He had seen the difference, and that made all the difference. She rose, stepped across the firelight, and placed her hand on his. His grip stilled, the knife lowering. For the first time, she did not see a scarred recluse or a silent outcast. She saw logs dragged from the forest, stones piled for a hearth, a roof stitched with bark and clay. It was no palace, but when Josephine swept the dirt floor and laid the first quilt across their bed, she felt richer than she had ever felt in Ohio. Standing beneath stained glass with Samuel's hand crushing hers, the wolf claimed the threshold, keeping watch through the nights. Smoke curled from the chimney, steady and thin, marking their place in the world. One morning, Josephine stood outside, the meadow bursting with lupine and paintbrush, dew catching in the light. Scott came up behind her, his presence a weight she had come to crave. He did not speak often, but when he did, his words carved themselves into her heart. "You are not ruined," he said, voice low, certain. Her throat tightened. She turned to him, fingers brushing the scar on his face. The mark he had once thought made him unworthy of others. "Neither are you." Their foreheads met, quiet and unhurried, the wilderness around them holding its breath. It was not the vows of a church or the approval of a town. It was something older, truer, two broken souls binding themselves not with words, but with choice. And so their lives began, days filled with work, planting, mending, hunting, tending. Nights filled with silence that no longer wounded but healed. Sometimes she would sing softly by the fire, half-remembered hymns from her childhood, and Scott would listen with eyes closed, as though each note mended something long torn within him. Seasons would turn, storms would come, hardships would press against their door, but Josephine knew, deep in her marrow, that she would never again face them alone. She had walked through humiliation, through exile, through fire and snow, and on the other side she had found a man who did not see her as abandoned, but as chosen. And for Scott, who had once believed he was cursed to solitude, he had found a woman who did not fear his silence, nor his scars, nor his wildness. She had seen him, and she had stayed. The world would forget them, perhaps. No songs would be sung of a scarred recluse and a cast-off bride. But in their meadow, beneath the endless sky, their story would live, written not in ink, but in the fire. Years rolled like the river that cut through their valley, slow in summer, furious in spring, quiet under ice in winter. Josephine and Scott learned to move with its rhythm, their lives stitched to the seasons. Their bond hardened like iron with each trial they faced. The cabin grew from bare logs into a home. Smoke rose from its chimney not only in winter, but every day, the surest sign of life. Its walls bore marks of their labor, Scott's axe strikes, Josephine's hand-carved shelves, the scratch of her needle mending quilts by firelight. To the world beyond the ridges, it was nothing, but to them, it was a kingdom. Scott worked the land with the same quiet ferocity that had once kept him alive alone. He cut fields, turned earth, planted corn and beans. Josephine tended a garden of herbs, coaxing life from soil she had once believed would never welcome her. Together they built fences, repaired roofs, and when storms tore their work down, they built again. The wolf stayed, though never tamed, a shadow at the tree line, a guardian at their threshold. It grew gray with the years, but never lost its watchfulness. To Josephine, it became a symbol of everything she had once feared, but now claimed: wild, loyal, untamed. There were hard times, winters when food grew scarce, and Scott trapped fox and hare to keep them alive. Summers when fever swept the valley, leaving Josephine trembling in sweat, while Scott held her through the night, his silence heavier than prayer. Storms that split trees and sent water rushing through their meadow, testing the foundation of their cabin. But through every hardship, they faced it not as strangers bound by necessity, but as partners bound by choice. Sometimes Josephine would wonder what had become of Samuel, of the town that had cast her out. But the questions faded quickly, like echoes swallowed by mountains. The meadow was her answer, the cabin was her justice, Scott's presence was her redemption. What amazed her most was how love grew not like fire, sudden, consuming, but like roots, deep and unseen. It was in the way Scott left wood stacked by the hearth before dawn, so she would never wake to cold. In the way she patched his shirts, her stitches uneven but strong, and he wore them as though they were finery. In the silence they shared at sunset, when words were unnecessary because the valley itself seemed the strength of their father and the resilience of their mother, unmarked by the world that had once cast both parents aside. Josephine often thought of the night Scott had asked her to choose, stay or leave, with the town's eyes upon her. How different her life might have been if she had clung to fear instead of stepping into freedom. Now, with the meadow alive in laughter, she knew that moment had been more than a choice. It had been rebirth. Scott, for his part, remained a man of silence, but age softened him. His eyes, once sharp with suspicion, grew gentler when he watched his children. His scar, once the mark of solitude, became a story he allowed Josephine to tell. A story not of shame, but of survival. Sometimes he would even smile, brief and rare, but when he did, it lit Josephine's world brighter than firelight. Seasons turned again, children grew, the wolf passed quietly into the earth it had guarded, and Scott and Josephine stood together at its grave, their hands twined, their silence full of memory. In time, gray touched Josephine's hair, silver threaded Scott's beard. Their meadow bore the marks of years, deeper roots, worn paths, the cabin's logs weathered but strong. And still, each morning, they rose together. Still, each evening, they shared the silence of a fire's glow. The world beyond the ridges may have forgotten them. No preacher spoke their vows, no townsfolk carved their names into records. But in that meadow, beneath the endless sweep of sky, their love carved itself into something greater than memory. Josephine knew that when the day came for her to close her eyes, she would not see shame, nor cold streets, nor mocking crowds. She would see the first snow falling outside the cave. She would see Scott's scarred face leaning over her, not with judgment, but with choice. And she would know, without doubt, that theirs had been a love strong enough to outlast the cruelty of men, the bite of winter, and the silence of years. A love not told in sermons or songs, but lived, fiercely, quietly, in a meadow that became there forever. The meadow had turned to gold. Summer's green had given way to tall grasses swaying in the wind, their tips burning amber in the low autumn sun. The cabin stood weathered but strong, its smoke curling steady, a sentinel against the years. Children grown now lived lives of their own, some settled in valleys nearby, Some wandered farther, carrying a piece of the meadow in their hearts. Yet Josephine and Scott remained, side by side, as they had always been. Age had carved its story into their bodies. Josephine's hair, once dark, now shone silver in the firelight. Her hands bore lines from years of mending, planting, and cradling children. Scott's back had bowed, his scar deepened into furrows, but his strength never left entirely. He still rose each morning to split wood, though his swings were slower, deliberate. The wolf was long gone, yet Josephine often thought she heard it padding at the edges of her dreams, keeping its eternal watch. The nights grew longer in autumn. Josephine loved them most when firelight painted the cabin walls, and Scott sat close, whittling or sharpening tools he no longer truly needed. Sometimes their children visited, filling the meadow with laughter and grandchildren's shouts. But when the cabin quieted again, when it was just the two of them, Josephine felt the fullness of their life most keenly. One such evening, with frost crawling across the windows, she spoke what had long rested in her heart. "Do you ever think of them?" she asked softly. Scott looked up from his carving, his brow furrowing. "The townsfolk," she clarified. "Samuel, the ones who left me in the snow." His knife stilled. For a moment, she thought he would remain silent, as he so often had in years past. But then he set the wood aside and met her gaze. "They don't live here," he said simply. "We do." It was not anger, it was truth. Josephine felt tears sting her eyes, not from sorrow, but from the grace of it. She reached across the firelight, found his hand, and held it tight. Outside, the wind moaned through the trees, but inside their home, peace reigned. As the season deepened, Josephine felt the weight of years pressing gently upon her. She tired more easily, her steps slowed. One morning, while gathering herbs by the stream, she paused to catch her breath and realized she no longer feared. Joined her in silence. They would sit wrapped in furs, his shoulder against hers, saying nothing while the meadow surrendered to white. Words were no longer needed. Their silence was no longer empty. It was full, brimming with everything they had lived, everything they had survived. One evening, as twilight deepened, Josephine whispered, "You saved me." Scott's hand found hers, rough and warm. His voice was low but steady. "No, you saved yourself. I just gave you a fire." The truth of it sank deep, as warming as the hearth itself. Years passed, and the meadow saw many more springs, summers, autumns, and winters. But at last, time came to call. Josephine's breaths grew shallow, her body weakening. She did not fight it. She had walked far, loved deeply, lived fully. On her final night, she lay in the bed Scott had built with his own hands, the quilt she had stitched decades ago pulled up to her chin. The fire burned low, casting soft light across the room. Scott sat beside her, older now than she had ever dreamed he'd live to be, his hand clasping hers. She turned her head, silver hair spread across the pillow, and whispered with the last of her strength, "I was never ruined." Scott's scarred face bent close, his forehead resting against hers. His voice, roughened by years, broke just slightly. "Never. You were my salvation." She closed her eyes with a smile, and the meadow outside seemed to hush, as though bearing witness. When dawn came, Scott rose slowly, alone now in body but not in spirit. He stepped outside into the frost-laden air, looking out over the meadow they had claimed. The grasses bent under the weight of ice, the mountains beyond stood eternal, and for a moment he felt her presence in every breath of wind, every curl of smoke, every golden shaft of light breaking through the clouds. The world might never know their names, nor sing their story in songs. But in that meadow, beneath the endless sweep of sky, their love endured, fierce, quiet, unforgotten. And when Scott's time finally came, the valley would cradle them both, together, always.